All right, Vernon, let's start with this running back position because there's so many options out there. I was doing a little homework on it just a few hours ago.
Okay.
There's a lot of talent there, a lot of versatile players, a lot of guys that can do different things. So it's not reliant on one guy or two guys, potentially, if some of the young guys step up. And it's seems to be a strong position, but we won't necessarily know who's going to take the lead or those second and third options in terms of running the football and catching the ball out of the backfield.
Well, this situation kind of takes me back to 2 seasons, actually. It takes me back to 2013, and it also takes me back to 2010, where Auburn, although Michael Dyer in 2010 he was the feature back, but there were several backs that contributed to the production running back wise in that year. You're talking Mario Fannin and Ontario McCaleb, who were very active in the running game, somewhat of a change of pace type situation. You fast forward to 2013, giving a similar situation where you had the onslaught of Trey Mason and also Ricardo Lewis, who would actually run that jet sweep for the Auburn Tigers, and Corey Grant. And during those particular years, a lot of great production out of the Auburn Tigers. You're talking about the quarterback, both years, 2010 and 2013, the quarterback rushing for over 1,000 yards. Then you having the tailback in Michael Dyer and Trey Mason rushing for another 1,000 yards. So you're talking about a situation where Auburn has a unique opportunity coming into spring practice and ending spring practice in the A-Day game with a lot of viable options. And also, if you think about it, I believe Jartavius Whitlow is the favorite as the feature back. Of course, you have Cam Martin returning. And also, when you think about what's coming this fall, Mark Anthony Richard, a highly touted recruit who is not participating in spring practice. And you have DJ Williams. A lot of guys caught on to DJ Williams later on in the recruiting process. His value skyrocketed around November, and Auburn was able to snag him. I think Auburn is in an incredible position running back wise. And I'll go out on a limb and say it here first. Auburn will have a 1,000-yard rusher, although for the first time in a long time was not able to achieve that goal on last season, Mark. Different ways you can look at this offensive line situation for Auburn. And I don't like to use the term lazy, but I think it was a lazy, kind of scapegoat to say that the offensive line was the total problem to why Auburn was a little bit anemic offensive-wise. I think more so you got to look at the big picture. You're talking about a bunch of guys, you're talking about Kim Caleb, Mike Horton. I think Prince Winagu is probably one of the best athletes that I've ever seen at Auburn as a lineman. He was actually, he actually had aspirations to play basketball. So, he definitely has the athleticism to be an elite offensive lineman. I'll go out on a limb and say this. When you have a situation where there are differences in philosophies, you're talking about Gus Malzahn, who likes to go fast. He is kind of sort of for lack of a better way of putting it, when you're really good at something, you become a micromanager at it. And when you have Chip Lindsey, who wants to bring his philosophy in, then you have, kind of like a conflict of interest, if you will. And when you're asking the offensive lineman to do something one way, but in accordance is conflicting, then you're going to have misassignments. You're going to have plays where, offensive linemen become discouraged. And that way you start to have an abysmal performance down the stretch. Now, when I look at this, you're talking about an average of three, high-end 3-stars at the offensive line, because there was actually 1 2-star on that line, the transfer from Massachusetts. So you have a lot of talent on this particular offensive line, but the only issue that you have, I think the difference in philosophies, also the fact that there just was not a lot of continuity in what they were trying to do. You're talking about blocking for a run pass option for a quarterback that was never going to run the ball. You're also talking about a situation where there were times where Jarrett Stidham actually had the time to throw the football. But if you really dissect Jarrett Stidham's skill set, his passing game is not very strong within the inner intermediate pass game where the ball is usually open on the quick route. So the longer the offensive linemen are being asked to block, because in SEC you might have 2.5, maybe 3 minutes at the most.
I just want to clarify something here, and I want you to explain something to me and everybody else. When you say the intermediate routes for Jarrett Stidham, all we've heard about Jarrett Stidham, and I've seen him play quite a bit of football, and always thought that he had the arm talent to play at the next level. You know, there's a lot more that goes with that than just having the arm talent. But are you talking about down the seam?
I'm talking about kind of sort of down the seam that there's actually what you call a comeback route. He almost threw a pick 6 in that route against Purdue. So that's just not a strong suit. And usually that route is open, but if you're not looking for it timing wise, you're going to have to spend a little bit more time in the pocket. Also, you're talking about a situation where the offensive linemen are blocking for a scheme that's just not going to happen. The run pass option is not going to happen with Jarrett Stidham because there's no threat to run the ball. I believe now, for several reasons, I think the offensive line is going to be a lot more productive this year. You have a viable dual threat quarterback. Things are going to move a little bit quicker. So you should see a lot more positive production out of the offensive line. And I think media outlets, like you said before, overstate the offensive line's role in the Auburn's abysmal performance up until Purdue last season.
Yeah, they kind of corrected some things against the Boilermakers. They just got really healthy in that one. And I think a lot of it had to do with an athletic advantage that was one of the bigger ones
for sure
during the bowl season, even though Purdue, certainly sometimes you can't explain it because they played, you make all sorts of comparisons between the Big Ten, let's say, and the SEC, and you could make like comparisons to say, okay, well, Purdue beat Iowa, Iowa beat Mississippi State beat Auburn. Why can't Purdue play with Auburn?
Right.
Well, number one, once you start to the transitive property, it's all about matchups as well. And obviously, Auburn was just not a good matchup for Purdue, number one. Number two, if the two teams play 10 times, it's never again 63-7. But Auburn probably wins 8 times, if not 9 times. They're just a better team. And a team that we saw play against Washington, a team that we saw several times during the season, but we didn't see them consistently enough show up in that game. And Purdue was a little bit overrated based on the Ohio State effort. And other than that, they were an okay team, but like a top 45 or 50 team in Auburn, despite the record, I will say that was one of the 15 or 20 best teams in the country.
For sure. When you talk about Purdue as well, I actually, around the time when I first got really serious about, being a student of the YouTube sports analysis thing, when I predicted this game, I predicted more so like 36-17, somewhere along those lines, because I didn't think Purdue would be prepared for what a Gus Malzahn called offense. So it kind of, they actually exceeded my expectations.
Well, Vernon, at 36-17, that sounds like you were way off because it was a 56-point win and they won by 19. But I got to say that you were probably more on the money than just about anybody out there, I can imagine, because that's basically saying that Auburn's going to dominate this game. It's rare to see a matchup in bowl season that somebody says, okay, well, they're going to win by 45 points.
40, right, exactly.
Because it rarely happens, and the teams are most likely, especially amongst the Power 5 conferences, they're evenly matched based on seeding to a certain extent. So to foresee 63-7, nobody does that. So you had a definite beat on a situation in which Purdue was only a 3-point underdog, but we got to see Auburn. And what do you think? Of course, we're going to project toward 2019, and that should be the focus. But I'm curious about Jarrett Stidham's transfer to Auburn and Gus Malzahn's style of offense and what he likes to get out of his quarterback. As we've talked in the past, and Nick Marshall being the best example of being better runner than passer and really leading a dynamic offense that put up rushing totals that were just ridiculous against really good SEC defenses. And then what we've seen in recent years, and then Jarrett Stidham not, obviously being a liability running what Gus Malzahn would like to do, but was it just a situation where it was just too good of a quarterback to pass up, an NFL potential quarterback that even though he didn't fit the scheme, hey, we got to take this guy on because he's potentially that good?
Well, one of the things that I think about is Gus Malzahn back in 2009 having Chris Todd actually, and he was able to be highly productive in the Gus Malzahn offense, which was a little bit more productive as far as the running back goes. Chris Todd wasn't asked to pass a lot; he was very effective in the offensive, of course. Not nearly as effective or as entertaining as, say, Cam Newton and Nick Marshall, and obviously didn't produce the results that Cam Newton and Nick Marshall, produce. And then you talk about Chip Lindsey. I think this was a situation where Jarrett Stidham fit more so of what Gus Malzahn was trying to accommodate for Chip Lindsey. Because if you think about the offense under Chip Lindsey, not a lot of tempo, not a lot of quarterback being asked to run the football. And of course, that somewhat, I'm not going to say disastrous marriage, but that, shaky marriage just didn't work between Gus Malzahn and Chip Lindsey. And I think Gus Malzahn at his core would much rather have the situation that he has now in Joey Gatewood, Cord Sandberg, Malik Willis, and Bo Nix in being viable dual threat quarterbacks versus the Chris Todd, Jarrett Stidham type quarterback that literally has no defensive coordinator intimidated by their ability to run the football.
Talking Auburn with the Tigers headed toward their spring game to cap off the spring session there on the Plains with the A-Day game. And of course, a little bit later in our session here, our call-in show, we're going to talk Alabama football. We got Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama coming up a little bit later, and I will take your calls. Vernon will as well, 860-325-3687. I'll get that in the live chat, but definitely check out the videos that we posted with Vernon here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Just thoroughly impressed with the detail and the precision and the delivery of this is a topic, this is a unit, this is a breakdown, and really methodically going through it for what we have here, the hardcore college football fan, the smart fan like you. So we appreciate you stopping by. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, with the live stream. Again, we're featuring Auburn and Alabama. But as you know, Vernon, these next couple of weeks, it started really last week. These next few weeks are just going to be crazy with spring games, so I'm going to be pulling my hair out. But I do fortunately have enough of it that I could pull a little bit out and be okay. We're going to start it actually tonight with Kevin McGuffey from Last Word on College Football is going to stop by following the Kentucky spring game. He will be there and will be joining us for a live chat right here. So everybody will be back about 9 o'clock tonight, 9 o'clock Eastern time, talking Kentucky spring game. And of course, we'll open it up to general college football discussion. But I'm just going to point out the Power Five in play tomorrow: Alabama, Arizona, Auburn, Baylor. We've got Florida. We've got Illinois, Kansas, Kansas State. We've got Michigan State on the field tomorrow, Minnesota, Mississippi State, Mizzou, Nebraska, North Carolina, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oklahoma. We also have Penn State, Pitt. We've got Stanford. We've got Syracuse on the field tomorrow, Tennessee, Texas, Texas A&M. And let's see, we've got dipping into the group of five, UCF and USF. We've got Utah, Virginia Tech, West Virginia as well. So I'm going to get to as many of those teams as possible to provide analysis, but that might be stretching it just a bit. I made a list here, Vernon, of who we've talked about just in the last week. We have plenty of analysis on Ohio State, Purdue, Nebraska, Clemson, Miami, Florida State, Texas, Florida, South Carolina, Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, Auburn, Arkansas, Tennessee, USC, and Oregon. And I'm probably missing a few. TCU would be one. And some talk on the NFL draft, which is coming up, of course, in 2 weeks. So, Vernon, as you take in this game tomorrow, do we have any idea at this point how the structure of the spring game is going to be? You know, we see all shapes and sizes in regards to offense versus defense. Various rules being employed. I hear that Nebraska is going to be hitting tomorrow. Clemson was pretty aggressive at their spring final last week. Ohio State, not so much tomorrow. They're going to be basically playing flag football. Do we have any insight into the way Gus Malzahn would like to kind of put this in play tomorrow?
Well, usually considering the quarterback battle, I think the fans are going to be very disappointed in the fact that the quarterbacks will not be going live tomorrow. I think Gus Malzahn and his coaching staff has seen all of the information that they've wanted to see up to the spring game, to where I'll go out on a limb and say that that Auburn has two guys quarterback wise that they want to that they're going to be looking at very seriously, that in Bo Nix and Joey Gatewood. And public perception says that Joey Gatewood is the favorite to start in the Advocare Classic. But now, as far as, formats and, how Gus Malzahn is going to run this particular spring football practice, I want to be honest with the fan base and just say, I really have not even divvied into that portion of the spring game as I've been doing thorough analysis on what leads up to the spring game. But I have actually been to a spring game before. And for the most part, just as far as information that a fan will receive is usually not synonymous to what you're going to see opening kickoff.
Vernon Speaks Sports. I encourage you to check it out right here on YouTube. Vernon Speaks Sports. It's all one word. Just get it out there and type it up. Vernon Speaks Sports right here on YouTube, and you're going to be astounded at what you see, and especially if you love Auburn. But my thought is, if you love college football, then you try to keep track of as many of the big power programs as possible. And so check out his work right there. Anything in particular you've been working on over the last week or so?
Well, there've actually been several videos that I talked about, and some that, one that just I don't believe gets enough attention, but it also, shows up in the bloody end, and that's the place kicker position. What a lot of folks don't understand is that Auburn has had the benefit of having Daniel Carlson, who is the all-time SEC leading scorer, as your place kicker, but his brother takes over. And if we look back at Daniel Carlson, you're talking about 80+% during the course of his career, never missing an extra point. But you bring his brother on, Anders Carlson, who was 60%, actually missing key field goals against Washington and one against Mississippi State that could have actually helped momentum-wise, as Auburn was kind of struggling offensively in that game, could have helped them kind of get back into that game, as well as a fumble right at the goal line by Boobie Whitlow. So sometimes we discount how important the place kicking position is, especially in the Gus Malzahn offense, as usually most Auburn fans can attest. Usually when you cross the 50-yard line, you're guaranteed to get 3 points with a guy like Daniel Carlson. Also, I really like, one of my favorite positions on Auburn's football team defense-wise is the buck position. And if you think about over the years that Auburn has been very successful defensively, you had guys like D Ford, followed by Carl Lawson, and just recently Jeff Holland. When that position, just statistically, there may be a correlation and there might not be, but I'm a real numbers guy, and I believe the numbers don't lie. When the buck linebacker position either produces 9.5 sacks on average, which what those three guys did, and 14.5 tackles for a loss, that has led to defenses for Auburn that have been very productive and have been defenses that have come close to leading Auburn to championships. You talk about the 2013 SEC championship, D Ford. You talk about the 2016 production where Auburn shut Clemson down. You talk about Carl Lawson. And then you talk about 2017, where Auburn was literally staring at being the first two-loss college football team to possibly make it into the playoffs, literally playing toe-to-toe with Georgia late in the third quarter with Kerryon Johnson. You got Jeff Holland, who was very productive in that game as well. So usually when that buck linebacker position plays at a high level, usually that spells very good news for the Auburn defense. Now, we would like to believe that we got three possible guys that could take on the air of that particular throne that usually gets Auburn defensive players in the NFL. A guy that we're looking at is Nick Coe, T.D. Moultrie, and Big Cat Bryant. And let's just say, for example, the good news for Auburn defensive line wise, if one of those guys doesn't take on the Buck defensive linebacker role, one of them can also supplement on the defensive line, which the Auburn fan base and everyone surrounding the Auburn program should be thankful that Derek Brown decided to come back. That's huge for the Auburn Tigers.
You guys know the deal. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. It is our quest to bring the best in discussion, debate, and analysis across the landscape of college football. We're talking Auburn and Alabama, a bit of an Iron Bowl call-in show here on a Friday night leading into the spring games for both the Tide and the Tigers. We got Vernon Speaks Sports on the line representing Auburn. And again, I encourage you guys to check out his YouTube channel. It is quite packed with not just a ton of content, because that's not what gets the job done. A ton of content that is quality content and analysis of Auburn football. And Vernon's been kind enough to allow me to post a few of his videos here on my channel to supplement what we do. And you know that we just, if looking at the SEC, I pretty much covered the entire SEC at some point this spring with analysis of what's going on in each and every camp. And in just a few days, we will get back to a lot of the teams that are playing this weekend with Alabama, Auburn, as Vernon joins me again to talk Auburn after the spring game and to put a cap on the 15 sessions. We got the live chat, of course, going. We've got Cash Boy D telling us that he's going to be at the Auburn spring game. We've got Jance 716. And so, Vernon, you hit on part of this. He's wanting to know your overall evaluation of the front seven on defense.
Well, the thing about the front seven of the defense is you have so many athletic and viable options. One of the things that I like is the fact that Big Cat Bryant, TD Moshry, you also have the production of Derek Brown coming back. If nothing else, going into the Advocare Classic, you have a great deal of experience, which I think will give Auburn the competitive advantage over Oregon because they've been there before. Most of these guys that have played this game, they played in the Chick-fil-A Kickoff Classic against Washington. A lot of these guys have even played in 2 games against Clemson. So that's going to give the competitive edge for as far as the defensive line goes, because in the Kevin Steele run defense, that is the heart and soul of the defense. And now you team that up with what the Auburn Tigers would like to believe is going to be a much more athletic linebacker core that can cover a lot more range. You talk about the, inception of the possibility of Owen Papo being active. He was one of the top recruits in high school last year out of Grayson, Georgia. You talk about Michael Harris. You talk about KJ Britt, who's going to take on the Mike linebacker role. Now, to answer your question, the defensive line position is a position at Auburn that you absolutely do not have to worry about, because Derek Brown will be able to anchor this defensive line based on all that's coming back. And a lot of guys, and in a lot of situations, folks discount the athleticism of Marlon Davison, who can play interior or exterior. Then you talk about the prospect of, I really like how Daniel Thomas, the safety, actually helps to supplement also in the running game. So I'm telling you, man, you do not have to worry about anything inside the box, probably not even outside the box in the interior run game, which will be very, very vital as you get into the rigors of the SEC.
Vernon Speaks Sports. We encourage you to go over there and check him out on YouTube. It is a pretty fascinating rundown of Auburn football. If you love the Tigers, if you love the SEC and need to keep track of the best teams in the conference, then you check him out to keep track of Auburn. And of course, this is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. And if this is maybe the first time you've checked us out, maybe it's a time or two that you've looked at us, check out the videos. And I believe that if you enjoy college football, if you love college football, then you need to lock it in right here.
and that's the truth, man. I mean, because I've been following, Mark Rogers, SG1 Sports, and just, almost fanatical analysis of college football sports. If you especially in the Deep South, that's pretty much the conversation. You talk about Auburn football, you talk about Alabama. Oh man, we're gonna beat y'all this year. All this stuff. So it's always a conversation piece in the Deep South.
So this is a difficult one in regards to a question on the live chat, just because we're looking at two inexperienced. Well, we're technically looking at four inexperienced quarterbacks with Stidham moving on. There's a consensus thought for the most part that it's a two-man battle. So we've got Bo Nix and Joey Gatewood in particular. This particular viewer, RLB Laney, is asking about the quarterback competition, who you think is going to win the job. And again, before Vernon speaks on this one, I want everyone to, temper your expectations of analysis, because we have no game tape on these guys. We have no game tape, so it's difficult to assess their skills and abilities. You got to go off high school tape. You got to go out off of what you hear and see and what comes out of camp, and that type of an evaluation of scouting reports. And then we're going to see something in the spring game, but it's not going to be against necessarily fully live bullets. So, Vernon, your thoughts about Nix, Gateway, and Gatewood and the rest of the competition?
Malik Willis has actually been on campus for quite some time. He served as a backup for Jarrett Stidham. So one would presume that a young man who has been there, who, understand the philosophies of the offense, one would think that this would be a landslide decision, that Malik Willis would be the quarterback, and this would be basically a no-brainer. But apparently, just kind of given the climate of what's happening at Auburn, that's not the case. Most implications show that you're probably going to be looking at Joey Gatewood and Bo Nix. I actually like both quarterbacks for equally opposite reasons, and not to discount Malik Willis. I think Malik Willis is a phenomenal athlete, and I think he can play the quarterback position under the Gus Malzahn run offense in some variations. In my honest opinion, just from, when you're looking at film, you can see perception, and you can see how, the other guys kind of perform when a quarterback is on the field. There's something about Malik Willis that is not so much his ability. There's something about him perception-wise that doesn't give me that feel of command, that doesn't give me that feel of leadership. And that's something when you're talking about high-level SEC West, because I want to think, I want to argue that the SEC West is a very competitive sub-conference in the SEC. When you're talking about taking on the role as being the lead quarterback for a team that has expectations to win at least 9 to 10 ball games a year, I just don't see Malik Willis as being that guy. Now, when I look over to Bo Nix and Joey Gatewood, Joey Gatewood has an incredible skill set. He's about 6'5", I would assume about 227 pounds, out of Bertram Trail High School in Jacksonville, Florida. Very highly recruited. A lot of people would like to loosely compare him to Cam Newton. I'm not necessarily going to compare him to Cam Newton per se, because they're two different quarterbacks. But what I will compare is the physicality. When you're going into the Advocare Classic, Andy Avalos, the incepted defensive coordinator at Oregon, I feel very comfortable with Joey Gatewood's physicality as to the variations of defenses that Andy Avalos in that 3-3-5 variation set is going to throw at Auburn. I just don't think Bo Nix, although he is the quarterback for the future at Auburn, I just don't think this is the venue to throw a guy, even though he's won 2 straight state titles at Pinson Valley High School near Birmingham, Alabama. I just don't think the Advocare Classic is the venue to throw Bo Nix in. Now, when I look at Bo Nix on film, great command. He ran that offense for Pinson Valley. But I just don't think there's enough time. I just don't think he's been around the program enough to be able to take on that role. Joey Gatewood, in my opinion, will take the first snap at Advocare Classic.
Okay, there you heard it first. Joey Gatewood, your starting quarterback for the Auburn Tigers against Oregon, and what's going to be for me, as I looked at the non-conference games in 2019, that was my number 1 game of the week in week 1. It was my number 2 game overall to Texas LSU. I am amped to watch
for sure
Oregon play.
For sure, because if you think about, Auburn is always a very good draw when you talk about facing Pac-12 teams, because they, Pac-12 teams, not necessarily from a physicality standpoint, but with the style in which Auburn runs their offense, it usually serves as a good matchup for the 3-3-5 defenses that are run in the Pac-12 to try to slow down that West Coast offense. The only thing that's different about Auburn is we like to line up in a West Coast type offense, but we also like to pound the football running wise. So that's why it makes it it gets defenses way off balance. And we're going to see if Oregon is going to be ready for what Gus Malzahn has in store for the Advocare Classic.
Vernon, give us some insight into the plight of the Auburn fan, because we've talked about this. If you take Auburn as a football program and what is typically the production and wins and losses, and you go to any other division in college football, they're not necessarily going to win. And albeit I know people are going to jump on Clemson, but that was Clemson 2018. That wasn't Clemson every year, forever.
Right.
That's a Clemson team that's been a dynasty for about 5 years now. But if you march Clemson to even the Big Ten Eastern Division, which I consider to be the second best division in college football, yes, they'd have to run into Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State, but they'd have a fighting chance to win that division, as they do in the Western Division of the SEC. But Alabama's just been so dominant, so good. Just the daily life of thinking, hey, we have a really good football program. We win a ton of games, but it's just difficult to get through. And LSU has the same issue, but I guess these Auburn fans generally have to rub shoulders with Alabama fans every day, and what that's like.
It's been difficult, especially since, the inception of Nick Saban, who's having an incredible run. Obviously a more than historic run at Alabama. I would go out on a limb and say that probably one of the best runs in college football history, able to attract, for so many reasons, some of the most talented players in the country, has a good sale. He puts his guys in the NFL. They don't have to, perform astronomical at the NFL Pro Day to make it into the league. Several national championships, several SEC championships. And, when we look at the Auburn Tigers, proximity wise, being in the same state as Alabama, very close in proximity to Georgia, very close in proximity to Florida State as well. When you talk about recruiting, kind of pooling from the same, areas. And, you look at that area, even in Gwinnett County in Georgia, where some of the best college football players come out of that area. Everybody's got their hand in that particular pot. You look at the Auburn Tigers. I think you just have to, as a Auburn fan, as me being an Auburn fan and obviously a student of the game as it relates to Auburn and college football in general, having the direct experience as being an Auburn student back in the early 2000s, back in those days, we were just glad to be ranked. If we were ranked in the top 15, we thought that was a goal. Then you fast forward to 2004 with that 13-0 season, we started to kind of think, we're on to something. Then you move on to 2010, actually winning the national championship. And then we were good with that, okay? But you move on to 2013, that's a 3-year span. That's starting to get up into the what Auburn fan base, because I even coined the phrase the post-2010 fans, because we started to get a different kind of fan base with a different kind of, we started to kind of diversify the fan base and get to a different level of expectation. And man, you sandwich that in with the 2013 national championship appearance. That game right there, Auburn was literally seconds away from being, in my opinion, where the Clemson Tigers are right now. You give Auburn that national championship, you're talking about more elite athletes being interested in the program. You're talking about really, really bringing it to Alabama every year, because you're talking about beating them 2 times in a 3-year span in the Nick Saban era. So that heightened the expectation, and I think that's where the disdain for Gus Malzahn comes in for the Auburn fan base, because you bring us right here and you snatch it right away at the last second. And a lot of times his, press conferences are just so casual. Oh, we had our chances. Oh, we'll get them next time. That's just not going to work for the Auburn fan base.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So I've known Tommy Tuberville for a number of years, and you mentioned the 2004 team, that it seems almost unfathomable at this point that an SEC team could go 13-0 in a conference that right now I rate as the best in college football, and at the time was arguably the best in college football in 2004, right. And they don't get a chance to win the national championship in what is, of course, a flawed system, in which, not that the two teams that were playing for the national championship didn't deserve it either, but there just needed to be a playoff, and you had USC and Oklahoma, who started the season at 1-2, and you had Auburn down around 19, and they just hit a ceiling.
Oh yeah,
and they were going to displace one of those two. So anyway, I was just alluding to Tommy Tuberville, who actually just in the last few days announced his nomination for Alabama State Senate. And so I reached out to him, and I've always thought Tommy Tuberville was a first-class coach and person, and that's just from my dealings with him in being just a guy that always accommodated us. When I was down there covering Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and Alabama, he always was very accommodating, giving me interviews on the practice field. When I first hadn't even met the guy at the time, he was at an SEC coaches convention in Birmingham, and I was about 5 blocks away doing the newscast live. And he was kind enough, as just a new coach in the SEC with Ole Miss, to leave the coaches convention, go 5 or 6 blocks down the street to do a 5 or 6 minute interview with us live on the news. And then after that, again, very accommodating across the board, did a National Signing Day show from his office at Ole Miss. And then, of course, he moved on to Auburn. Well, I ran into Tommy Tuberville just a few years ago at the American Conference Media Days when he was at Cincinnati, and I was a bit surprised. I shouldn't have been, but that he remembered me, remembered my name. And so we struck up a conversation. Then I noticed just a few minutes later that he was following me on Twitter. So we've been able to stay in contact. But if you look at his run at Auburn, certainly underrated. He wasn't facing the Alabama that is in the way today, but still to beat Alabama 6 consecutive times and to win major bowl games and to put his team in position in that top 10 range most of the time while he was there. And again, not to have the opportunity to play for a national championship, I'm sure is a difficult pill to swallow for Auburn fans and for his own coaching career, because that was a once in a lifetime shot to get a chance to do that, and was taken away from him and the Auburn Tigers.
During the Tommy Tuberville era, I think that was a great time, obviously, to be an Auburn Tiger. Tommy Tuberville given some of the most memorable wins in history, probably, for Auburn. You look at the 2004 team. I feel like the game against LSU that year, the last second touchdown, and also kind of the crazy ending to that game, kind of gave the fan base a glimmer of hope, like, hey, we're on to something. And sure enough, 13-0 that year with the tandem of Carnell Williams, and who is currently the running backs coach for Auburn, and Ronnie Brown. Impressive performances against the top tier teams of the SEC during that particular year. You look at consecutive wins over Alabama over that period of time, tapering off to something a little bit more undesirable than those may think. But no one should discount Tommy Tuberville's contribution to the Auburn fan base. I think he has a ton, although he moved on to 2 different teams after leaving Auburn. I personally, because I was in college during the time of Tommy Tuberville's tenure at Auburn, between 2000 and 2002. And you just talk about, just a mutual endearment for, because if you talk to most Auburn fans, really probably nothing too negative to say about Tommy Tuberville. Of course, he's not as revered as, say, Pat Dye, but definitely memorable experiences and such a class act. Such a, even when he's angry on the sideline, he does it in such a classy, genuine, just a genuine way. He's definitely, in my opinion, especially considering I'm biased because that was during the time I was at Auburn, just a class act and definitely an Auburn guy.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, my dealings with him, nothing but class and accommodation for my job and what I was trying to do. So, first-rate guy. I'm looking at the 2004 Auburn schedule, and again, this is in the SEC. So, he beats Mississippi State in game number 2. In game 3, they go out and they beat a number 5 LSU team. A couple weeks later, they go to Knoxville, Tennessee's 10th ranked in the country. They beat them 34-10.
Demolished them.
Yes.
If you looked at that game, just total domination.
They took out a decent Arkansas team. They beat Ole Miss on the road.
Actually, I was at that Arkansas game.
Okay.
I actually went to that game.
They took on what was later the 5th ranked team in the country again, Georgia, winning that game 24-6 against another top 5 team. So that's 4 top 10 wins, 2 top 5 wins at that point. They beat Alabama 21-13. They win the SEC championship game against Tennessee again, winning that game by 9 or by 10 points, and then they win in the Sugar Bowl against Virginia Tech, ranked 9th in the country. 5 top 10 wins.
Yeah, it's just incredible that Auburn just didn't get the opportunity to represent in the BCS national championship against a very, very potent USC team coached by Pete Carroll. Of course, they went on to win that national championship, but it doesn't take away from that particular football team and what they were able to accomplish with somewhat a not conventional linebacker core. In my opinion, that linebacker core actually featured Travis Williams, who is now the defensive coordinator at Auburn. The thing that I like about that, as we move fast forward to 2019, is the fact that Travis Williams, as a linebacker at Auburn, was largely undersized, was asked to do way more than maybe his skill set or even his physicality would allow. But Auburn had a very decent defense that year, and he had a very productive season. And that experience is something that I mentioned on several of my videos. That experience is something that Gus Malzahn will be able to borrow from, because Gus Malzahn is not an Auburn guy. He's out of Arkansas. But to have personnel on his team that are directly connected with the program, have personnel on his team that are directly connected with the most highly successful times of the program, that is with Carnell Williams, Travis Williams, and Cody Burns, it really gives Coach Gus Malzahn a lot of leverage coming into this 2019 season.